Hello and welcome to a off-season update from the Game Over Network. My name's Conrad Krausert. I'll kind of be the host throughout this whole journey from coast to coast, covering all of the Game Over Network teams up here in Canada. Of course, things have changed since recording, even if I only recorded with some of these guys a couple hours ago. So, if you want the most up-to-date updates from your Game Over crew, especially if you're in Toronto, Zach's been killing it. Head to your network's channels, and we'll probably have some content up there, if not now, in the next few days, breaking down free agency as things approach closer to the regular season. Now, without further ado, let's head on over to Montreal and join in with Andrew. Conrad Krausert, and we'll start off as far east as we go, the Montreal Canadiens, after finding a way into the playoffs, probably a little bit ahead of schedule. Andrew, how do you feel after having a little bit of hindsight now after that matchup with the Caps?
I think it was a really good learning experience for that team. I think that they realized very quickly that the rules are different in the playoffs and that you probably aren't going to get your way if you just play your way through it. You have to bite back a little bit. And that's an important lesson for a lot of those players. But I think they also realized that they could hang with a team that should have been able to beat them much easier than they did. The Capitals may have won the series, but on balance, they didn't outplay the Canadiens. They were outplayed. There was a goaltending mismatch, especially after the Canadiens lost Montembeault, and Logan Thompson was spectacular. And the Capitals were very opportunistic, absolutely. But the Canadiens, on balance, outplayed them. And that was impressive to me because this team shouldn't even be in the playoffs, frankly. They didn't have a second line center, they didn't have a second line. They had a first line that could meet up with good competition and proved in that series that they were the best line in the series. And they had two good third lines with trios that worked. But there was no second line, and teams shouldn't make the playoffs in the NHL with no second line.
And
It's wild that they were able to do that. I was very impressed. So it made me hopeful for what could come next. And I think that they will come out of that series not that disappointed because they weren't expected to win. They'll come out thinking, "Oh, we're close. We're closer than we actually thought." And they were confident coming into the year, fell flat out of the gate, and everyone was like, "Ah, oh, disaster." And they from that they managed to make the playoffs. It was a spectacular job. And now to add to it in the off season already to foreshadow.
yeah, we're getting ahead of ourselves. But there is a very few, probably a zero number of teams that can say they had two rookies of the year on their squad. Of course, I'm talking first about Ivan Demidov, who joins in late, gets the rookie of the year in the KHL. I think he's kind of unheralded just due to the strange circumstances around him getting to North America and didn't really add in the playoffs. But this is a player that came in with what, 3 games left in the regular season, if my brain's remembering correctly, to try and expect that to be lead to contribution in a postseason series against Alexander Ovechkin and co. I think is unfair expectations placed upon a young player in his first time playing on NHL sized ice.
100%. And at the same time, with no situation at even strength to put him in to benefit his skill set.
Yeah.
Because it sounds good in like an NHL video game to have Patrick Laine with Ivan Demidov at even strength. Like the playmaking, the shooting, it'll work. But they didn't have a center that would be able to carry those two defensively in the playoffs, right? So you've got a really young rookie who has almost no NHL experience. But yes, KHL, yes, but the NHL is different. Smaller ice, more physical. Like it's just a different game. And then you've got Liney on the other side who's already injured and kind of, you know, not great defensively at the best of times. Is not a great situation for the
No.
rookie. What I was impressed with Demidov for in his short NHL stint was, yeah, getting his first goal and everything in the regular season, but from the beginning of the series against Washington to the end, he went from one of the lowest impact players to one of the highest impact players, at least on the offensive side. He was not overwhelmed, I would say, at the beginning, but like I said, not put in a position to succeed. And then despite that, he kind of worked his way up and found a way onto the power play. And from there, he got confidence. And that translated through at even strength to the point when the Canadiens were trailing at the end. They were breaking up lines that had already worked to get Demidov more ice time in a situation where he could create some scoring chances. And that, to get that kind of trust in the playoffs at that age, as a guy who has a reputation for maybe not being the most amazing defensively, and also in a new situation, I was really impressed with him.
Yeah, and then of course the other rookie of the year, Lane Hutson, like obviously I'm a little, being the Flames host, a little sad that Dustin Wolf wasn't a little bit bigger competition for Lane, but he also took a step forward in the playoffs, and you can see we're going to foreshadow again a little bit more investment to get someone to play with him moving forward.
Yes, big time. Lane Hutson, yes, it's hard to even describe how impressive he was this season. And I totally agree with you on Dustin Wolf, honestly. I think we all know why, right? It all matters.
Defender versus goaltender, playoffs, non-playoffs.
Exactly, right? It's the same situation as Ginla versus Theodore so many years ago, right? So the way that these things are voted on are wild and not always based on merit, but it was a season where multiple players could have been legitimate rookies of the year, maybe even 4 of them, right? I think what Lane Hutson did and what Dustin Wolf did are more rare than what the young forwards did.
Yeah.
But yeah, Lane Hutson blew me away this year. Beginning of the season, and I was very high on Hutson. He's probably the last Canadiens prospect that I saw drafted that I was like all in on. Like, this kid, if he hits, is going to be a star. And I thought like he had hit. And in the beginning, I was like, but this year, probably third pairing guy, right? Like, he's got a lot to work on. And that's kind of where he started out. And it was like 10 games in, he's playing 22 minutes a night. And by the end of the season, he's getting games where he's leading the team in ice time, like over Mike Matheson, who has the cardio and physical ability to play like 28 and not break a sweat. Like, it was unbelievable what Lane Hutson was able to accomplish this year. And to be expected to be a defensive liability due to size, from the beginning of the season to the end of the playoffs, he went from, a bit of a defensive liability, figuring things out, to very reliable defensively, like extremely good at executing his proficiencies in the defensive zone to turn the tide and not have to face the issues that are more challenging to him, like being in front of the net. Like, you don't have to be in front of the net in battle if you never let them get into that situation. And he was excellent at it. He was excellent at breaking out of forechecks. Like, I'm so impressed with his maneuverability. I've never seen a player so agile on their feet. I think the comparisons to Patrick Kane on the ice only, hopefully, are accurate in a way, but I think he's even more elusive. I've never seen a guy this quick. As someone who I train boxing, which is so much of boxing is about the quick movement in small doses, like very, very quick, sudden movements that shift your body around to like psych out opponents or dodge and weave this way and that. Lane Hutson would be a spectacular boxer. I have never seen somebody so capable of throwing off NHL quality players from a situation that makes no sense. Like, he's stuck in the corner and like 2 guys coming in and he just like shimmy shakes and goes right through them. And they're like, what? It's unbelievable. His creativity is top notch. Somebody was joking earlier that, Calder this year, Norris next. And I was like, probably not, but I didn't expect him to win the Calder this year either. And I was one of his biggest boosters. So who knows? Maybe. The kid's crazy.
So that takes us through the offseason into draft night. And of course, Montreal enters with back-to-back picks Not quite the Sedin level third, fourth back-to-back, but they elect not to use either of them. In fact, they decide, we'll get a player that can impact our window like way sooner than any draft pick. They trade 16 and 17 to the Islanders, exchange for Noah Dobson. Immediate thoughts, of course, we are assuming we'll pair up with Hudson, but this is a huge move for the Canadiens.
Absolutely.
And you're welcome, by the way.
Yeah.
One of those picks, obviously, was Calgary's pick from back when you acquired Sean Monahan.
Yes, that was the being paid to take Sean Monahan, who was then excellent as both a player and a mentor for the young players here, and then revived his career, which was beautiful to see. He was phenomenal this year in Columbus.
Yes.
I don't think anybody who has watched Sean Monahan on like a team that they're covering or cheering for dislikes Sean Monahan. Like talking to Flames fans, like they all love him. There's something about that guy. He's got something, and I like him a lot. And I'm so glad to see his continued health and success.
100%.
But to get paid for it and then turn that into Noah Dobson is pretty wild.
Yeah, like just kind of exactly the guy you need to keep this window as far open as you can. Obviously, it's a tough slog. You still will likely have to go through Alexander Ovechkin at least for one more year and the Caps, and then who knows what comes out of the Eastern Conference. But to go from a team at the start of the year where you were wondering where the power play is going to go now into where Noah Dobson probably won't even run your power play one. That's probably Hudson's to headman.
Yep.
But to have those be your 2 point operators moving forward, it's obviously a bounty to have as a Canadiens fan.
Yeah, and it kind of silences any question of what the Canadiens were planning to do going forward. Were they going to say like, "Oh, well, that was a good progress year. Let's see how it goes next year," and like kind of slow roll it again and see like bank some picks and some more prospects and keep the rebuild going, or were they going to go not let's say all in, but push forward? And they didn't wait. Not even until free agency.
No.
Not even until the draft. They made the move that's going to put things forward and make them expected to make the playoffs next year. So now it's not just that was fun last year. Now it's all right. Let's go ahead. Let's move forward. We got to get back there again. That's the expectation. And Noah Dobson, what an incredible ad to do that, because not only does Dobson allow them to shift everybody down a little bit into a better spot on like the ice time allotment to, the role, etc. He also gives them a guy who's incredibly strong at even strength and on the power play on the right side, which they did not have. So they can change their power play setups between 1 and 2. Put everybody in a good situation, right?
Yeah.
And it allows them to play Caden Gooley on the left side all the time, which they have not been able to do because they are overstacked on the left and understaffed a little bit on the right. Caden Gooley is, in my opinion, already a number 2 defenseman in the NHL. He's just overtasked with playing off his side, and he has had some injury issues.
Yeah.
And once he's now down in a situation where he's tasked to do less because Noah Dobson's there, and he's able to play on his own side, it's going to be very tough to play against Caden Gooley, especially when now he's likely to have a player of the caliber of Alexander Carrier on his side, right side, sorry. So the Canadiens are very deep all of a sudden on defense. And, if Gooley plays with Dobson also, that's something that can happen. So there's a lot that could happen with this defense. They have a lot of versatility. Their entire top 4 are both proficient offensively and defensively now, which is good. Like Alexander Carrier is not, I wouldn't call him proficient. I'd say competent. Like he's not going to kill plays. He's very good at keeping plays alive. he's good at getting the puck out of the zone as well. So he's good at moving the puck up the ice. He's a good transition player.
Yeah.
He's not a defense only guy, is my point.
He's
Same
no
with
Robin Regeer to put my
Exactly.
Calgary bias into everything.
Exactly. So the Canadiens, the defense now it's gone in one move from good with like a really strong future, especially with David Reinbacher now, who no longer has to be rushed into the NHL in any sort of way. There's no pressure on him. You know, you've got a very strong top four now relative to most of the NHL. That's impressive work.
To go from okay to a threat in a single off season. I haven't seen that since the summer of Brad. But anyways, we're not going to go pick by pick, but the Canadiens certainly did take a little bit more of a swing at selecting out of the MHL and then a couple of WHL guys. What did you think overall of the later rounds for the Canadiens? Kind of lottery balls at best is the way I looked at it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of been the Canadiens' strategy with a lot of the picks that they've made is they identify something that they want, right? Like they're looking for a specific kind of player and somebody who can fit into their team culture. They're very extensive in their interviews. You know, some of their questions are very weird, in my opinion. Like when they asked David Reinbacher some question about like what he would have done in World War II, it was very weird.
Yeah, that was one of the stranger ones.
Yeah, but they seem to do a good job of identifying players who fit into slots that they're building for their team, right? Like they also have a very strong development team that I haven't seen as a person who's covered the Canadiens my whole life. Like they're just not a good developmental program team. But they've changed that very quickly. They've found ways to make players, even NHL players, develop into better players. Josh Anderson had a renaissance season. You know, like it's crazy. So I think they're in a position where they have a very strong system and they can now afford to roll the dice on skills in later rounds that they think could benefit them long term. And they have the confidence to try to develop that. And I like a big swing. You know, I don't know a ton about the prospects in this draft, I'll be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the Canadiens are in a position where they can try some weird stuff. And based on their track record so far in this short rebuild that they've supercharged, they've kind of earned my trust.
And I think that totally makes sense looking from the outside. But now let's look to free agency that starts today as if we're posting this. What are the team's needs? Let's maybe give a couple ideas of the type and maybe one player that you're looking with heart-shaped eyes at in free agency.
I don't know if there's a good situation in free agency for the Canadiens, but they do need to address the center position. They're going to lose Christian Dvorak in this offseason. They're going to lose, well, they're not going to lose, but I don't think that they can rely on Kirby Dach to be a second line center next season just based on the fact that he's coming back from injuring the same knee as he came back from last time. And he had a tough time, I think, mentally getting over, like being comfortable on that knee and putting him in situations that make him Kirby Dach the player. He's a very rough and tumble player. He likes getting involved in along the boards. He likes battling for pucks, and he just wasn't able to do that. He didn't have the confidence in his knee, and then he hurt that same knee again. So that should justify in his brain that he shouldn't have confidence in that knee, right? So I don't know if the Canadiens should trust him to make that way back in a single season. I think that's a lot to expect of him. If he does, it would be amazing. But as a team, I think they need to address the center position. I don't know if there's a free agent situation that makes sense. I think it might have to be another trade. I'm not sure if it's possible, but I still think the Canadiens should be looking at Pittsburgh and asking about their future and what they need, because they're in for a dark period here as they rebuild. They have
Sorry,
almost
Merrick.
no assets, and it's gonna be a tough time if they don't sell. I think I would knock on the door for Pittsburgh for one of those top two guys.
So you're saying that there may be smoke to that kind of ever-present rumor of 87 coming out east somewhere if you had your way.
I'm saying that it makes sense for Sid and the Penguins to make that trade. I think there's two places that Sidney Crosby would accept a trade to, and that's Colorado to play with Nathan MacKinnon, and Colorado just straight up doesn't have the assets to that makes sense for Pittsburgh, so that doesn't make sense for them. Or Montreal, his boyhood team, and I think the sell's very easy for Montreal to make. They say, Sid, you've accomplished everything in your career. You are like a surefire Hall of Famer, first ballot, forever. But wouldn't you like to put the cherry on top by bringing a 25th Stanley Cup banner to Montreal, your home team, the team you grew up cheering for as a kid? And I think the sell would be pretty easy. I think he would do it. And I think the Canadiens have the assets to make it maybe not worthwhile for Pittsburgh, like optically, but worthwhile monetarily, and to build some future assets to speed up the dark period they're about to enter, because it's going to be tough to sell seats.
So that's sitting down with Andrew Berkshire and addressing the Montreal Canadiens offseason. Andrew, thank you so much, and we'll probably talk to you again before the NHL season starts ramping back up once again in too short of a time.
Sounds good, man. Thank you.
And now we head a little bit to the west. From Montreal, we go to Toronto, and Zach Payne joining me, and a painful exit for the Toronto Maple Leafs out of the playoffs as they lose to the eventual Stanley Cup champions. But you had them on the ropes. How does it feel having a little bit of hindsight on it?
I mean, is there an answer aside from still bad? Like,
no.
At the end of the day, the Leafs, and this has been the case with the Toronto Maple Leafs for years, the knock on the Leafs has never been that they are a bad team. The knock on the Leafs is that when it matters, they never play up to their potential. And that happened again. They actually do manage to take care of business against the Ottawa Senators, but you should have. Ottawa was a much worse opponent in the playoffs compared to what Toronto usually faces. The second they face a team that is actually threatening, even though they do start off hot, like you mentioned, they get up to the 2-0 series lead. They're up 3-1 in Game 3. And then Paul Maurice, he sees that Austin Matthews is dominating the Barkov matchup. Quick little switch, puts Lundell on Matthews and Barkov on Tavares, and the series was over. Just like that. William Nylander and John Tavares suddenly forgot how to score, and the Leafs just completely imploded.
Well, I think that's a pretty harsh but fair analysis of the Toronto Maple Leafs playoffs. And there's only up to go from here, but it feels weird when you're saying that every single year, right? Like, you can only have so much optimism for so long, and we are starting to see the shakeup of that core, as obviously we're recording this prior to Mitch Marner either getting traded or who knows what's going on. Calls for tampering to be investigated by the NHL. How does all this chaos kind of boil down for you right now?
So the short version is it's beyond pastime to shake things up with this roster. For far too long, as you know, everyone in the NHL knows by now, the Leafs have been invested in this core four experiment, allocating at $11 million to four forwards. You know, I know Marner comes in a touch under 11. Nylander for a long time was under 11 as well, but so much money allocated to four forwards. And now that's gone. I know John Tavares re-signed, which we'll talk about, but he's not a core member anymore because of how much less money he's making. And Mitch Marner is obviously the big one because he's gone. He's going to be leaving, whether or not it's with Vegas or if another suitor pops up and offers him more money on July 1st. Who knows? But Mitch Marner will not be a Toronto Maple Leaf next season. So right there, that is the shakeup that we've been waiting probably 4 years for. Ever since 2021, it's been time to shake up the core because we knew A, it wasn't working, and B, with the flat cap environment caused by the pandemic, you just can't justify allocating the dollars the way the Leafs did. So it's time for something new, and I'm glad that we're at least going to see a bit of a shakeup.
But as much as things change, they stay the same. John Tavares signs a 4-year deal, or is it 4 years? My brain's full of soup. So a 4-year, 4.5, just south of that.
4.38 per year.
Yeah, just south. Rounding, it works in my brain. But, so what do you think of that deal for John Tavares? It's one of those deals that does carry over the 35 threshold.
That's an absolute sweetheart of a deal. He scored 38 goals last season. Is he going to do that again? No. But is he a pretty safe bet for 25 to 30? Yes. And with the cap going up in the last 2 years of that deal, assuming he's still on the Leafs roster, that is completely manageable. That'll be the equivalent of like a $3 million deal today, a few years from now with the cap exploding. And the worst case scenario is if he's bad, 2 years from now, he only has a 5-team no-trade list, so you could just dump that money if you have to. Tavares, he's never been a fleet-of-foot player. He's not very fast. He's never been. That's not his game. And so he has a better chance than most to age rather decently. Is he going to regress? Absolutely. He is going to continue to decline because Father Time is undefeated. But to say that he's just going to fall off a cliff, I think is a bit premature.
So... And until Mitch officially moves, we know he's no longer a Leaf. We don't know if the Leafs are going to get a return for him because the rumor over the last 24, 48 hours was there was a deal in place to go to Vegas. But as of right now, we're talking that it might be falling apart. And as I said, there's been calls for it to be an investigation by the league for tampering. And I don't think this is the first time the GMs have said they need to investigate Vegas. I think it's the first time it's gone to the media that tampering investigation needs to take place.
Yeah, so this is from Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts. This came out Sunday morning. This is what his summary of the situation is. This has been a situation that's been developing for at least a year, going back to last summer when the Leafs were trying to trade Mitch Marner for a package including Shea Theodore. And at the trade deadline, when the Leafs wanted Mikko Rantanen, there was a 3-team trade in the works that would have sent Rantanen to Toronto, Marner to Vegas, and some sort of package of picks and prospects to Carolina. Obviously, that didn't happen because of Marner's no-move clause, but the Vegas approached the Leafs at the draft and the combine and told the Leafs that if they make Marner's rights available before July 1st, they would be interested. Those conversations have began over the past week and obviously progressed to the point where we're getting reported packages. Vegas wants to do this to eliminate the opportunity for Marner to speak to other teams, even if the 8-year contract isn't going to happen. It's reported that it's only going to be like a 4-year deal for Marner, but Vegas is rightfully very paranoid that Marner is just going to go to the highest bidder, so they want to make sure that they get in the door first and lock him up before July 1st hits. Now, we know that Nick Roy is one of the names that has been talked about going back to the Leafs. Nick Hague is another. The reported package is both of those players and a draft pick, which would be honestly kind of insane for just a UFA's rights. I don't know if I've seen a package of multiple players and a pick for the rights to a player, but if it happens, it happens. I'm assuming it won't be quite that lucrative for the Leafs. But this is the important thing. There's talk that if Marner goes to Vegas, the Leafs are going to go after Vegas for tampering unless they make a sign and trade deal and send players or picks to the Leafs in exchange. Brad Treliving is extorting the Vegas Golden Knights, plain and simple. But Friedman also reporting the league is looking to make an example out of someone for tampering. There's kind of been this undertone of tampering around free agency for years, and it sounds like the league is looking for an excuse to crack down on it.
And of course it centers around Toronto. But anyways, I digress. The Leafs went
If it happened, if the shoe was on the other foot, it would absolutely happen. Like if it was Toronto that was being accused of tampering, there would absolutely be something that happens. The Leafs being involved is just, I think it's more coincidence. I don't think other teams would probably go after Vegas as well, because they, like, other Marner suitors would also probably target Vegas for this.
Yeah, but of course it involves Toronto, because everything revolves around Toronto. It's mostly just a joke. But let's now talk about the draft, because that happened. Leafs go into it not with a first rounder. There's a pretty big consensus that their second round pick of Luc Schoblocher, I hope I'm saying that name correctly, was a bit of a reach. A lot of people saying he has a slight chance to play in the NHL. But then they go with Tyler Hopkins out of the Kingston Frontenacs. People say that's a little bit better, but as we all know, I talked about it with Andrew, these later round draft picks are all lottery balls. Like, they're just a shot at an asset at the end of the day. Nobody can read the future. As much as I joke, I have the crystal ball here because I did predict who the Flames would pick. And I predicted the Rats in the playoffs taking over. But what do you think about the draft? Like, I know you're not a prospects guy. Do you feel like going with these forwards and centers kind of makes sense with the way the Leafs need to continue to build?
My take on the NHL draft is that you shouldn't be drafting for needs anyways, because the nature of how hockey prospects develop and their development curves, it is a longer process compared to other sports. So drafting for need just doesn't really make sense. You just got to draft good players and figure the rest out later. The Leafs go with a good amount of centers in this draft. Cool. Like right now they need a center, but that doesn't matter right now. 3 to 4 years from now, maybe some of these guys start to hit, and the Leafs, maybe they still need a center in 3 to 4 years, and that would be great, but it's just too hard to project needs 3 to 4 years out like that. The main takeaway from the Leafs draft is the players that they selected are all huge. They really emphasize size. Not a single player under 6'1" was taken in this draft. Now, the Luc Schoblocher pick and the Tyler Hopkins pick, those are both top 100 picks. I'm of the mind that if you have a top 100 pick, those guys should play in the NHL at some point in their careers. Again, it's a long ways out, but it is what it is. And then the rest of the guys, like after pick 100, I hope one hits of that. Like if you have the two top 100 guys hit and one of the later round picks hit, that's great. I will say that Matthew Lacar, the Kitchener forward.
Yeah.
What a weird, terrible pick, because his only asset, they basically drafted the Kitchener enforcer. Very odd pick, but there are also a few undrafted guys that they could go after as well. But all of these guys that the Leafs took, big emphasis on size, big emphasis on playing with that edge, with a bit more grit and physicality. That's something that the Leafs have emphasized this offseason, is trying to fix the mentality in the locker room. Bringing in prospects that have that mentality, again, just means that as you continue to hopefully fix your team culture, the guys that are coming in also are going to fit that as well.
A very Brad truculent draft for the Toronto Maple Leafs, trying to answer the question of how to get past those darn Florida Panthers in the East. Thank you so much, Zach, and enjoy the rest of the offseason. Hopefully you have fingernails left after whatever happens. But before we actually say goodbye, I'll give you one last chance. What hole needs to be filled for the Toronto Maple Leafs in free agency?
Hopefully not $9 million to Brad Marchand. But in all seriousness, I think just getting a couple more options at middle six forward. I know former Flame Andrew Mangiapane's name has been floated out there. Players like that can play on the second line if need be, can drive a third line a little bit more if need be. Other options just to have more flexibility. I really do like the Oilers model of just having so many centers that you can try 1,000 different combinations if something doesn't work. So I just need some more legitimate middle six options compared to what the Leafs have employed over the last several years.
So is a name like Jack Roslovic somebody that kind of intrigues you as that middle six guy? There's not a lot of centers available. The only other one
him
really
as a middle six guy, though. I view him more as a bottom six guy.
That's fair enough. But for us here at Game Over, thank you so much for breaking down Toronto's offseason, and we'll see how free agency goes and see where Mitch Marner ends up landing. We remain out east talking to the nation's capital, and obviously we've got Maude here with me.
Hello.
Maude, how has the offseason been now that you've kind of taken a rear view glance into the brief playoff experience for the Sens this year?
Yeah, this is our first upload on the Ottawa channel since the elimination in Game 6. So, yeah, it's been a while, eh? I think it doesn't sting anymore. Like, I tried to be pretty positive after the Sens got eliminated, but I think even more as time has gone on, I'm just pretty chill with how things played out. Especially since it was a series against the Leafs. I expected to be, like, completely tilted and just, like, really angry with how a loss could have potentially played out, but all things considered, I think it was a great season for the Sens. So we look on the bright side and we look forward to next season, which is what we'll be doing in this video.
Yeah, and I gotta say, because I came on with you during the playoffs, and you were pretty doom and gloom when we were last together. So
yeah,
good to hear
because that was the 3-0 hole after Game 3 when you were on with me. They turned it around a little bit to make it close, you know?
I'm going to take some credit for that.
Yeah.
Well, because we all know my other predictions have all come true.
That's true. I'm trying to remember, were you saying you were saying that it wasn't going to be a sweep? I can't remember now.
I was saying that the Sens needed to be optimistic and believe in the team. I remember that.
And they did a pretty good job of believing in themselves and not thinking that it's over being down 3-0, even though it was super close in Game 4 as well. It could have been a sweep in overtime, and then had a great game in Game 5, and Game 6 was as close as it can be. Mm-hmm. That's how it goes in the playoffs. The margins are super slim between all these playoff teams a lot of the time.
And it finally feels like Ottawa is out of that rebuild phase.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're trying to ramp up and get to where that playoff run can go a little deeper. So when we were talking before I started up the recording, you're saying the Sens have got a lot of their work done already. So why don't you kind of briefly touch on that?
Yeah, I think that's honestly one of the more encouraging things for me this offseason is that Steve Staios has already done the biggest moves that he needed to do, in my opinion. A lot of fans want to see a huge swing for the fences in free agency, you know, just bidding for the highest forward or best forward available, you know. But I don't really think a move like that is in the cards for the Sens, just because I think they have most of their roster spots filled out already, other than depth players. And part of that is Steve Staios getting the Fabian Zetterlund contract done a few weeks ago. And with the money that they paid him, it looks like they're probably going to be playing him as a top 6 forward, or at least like third line with power play time as well. So that seems like he's sort of their top 6 addition for the year, because coming in at the trade deadline, he played, I think, the first 11 or 12 games on the 4th line before getting a chance to be moved up. So I think that there's the team thinks that there's a lot more production there to come from him. So that was huge to get that done early and not have RFA negotiations linger on into July. Mm-hmm. And then as we're recording here today, it was just yesterday that Claude Giroux signed, which again is absolutely huge to get that done before July 1st, because there was rumors that if he hit the market, he could be getting upwards of like $5 million, $6 million. So the deal that he ended up taking was a fantastic hometown discount. And to be honest, the fact that he signed for a lower amount makes me wonder where he's going to be playing in the lineup this season for the Sens, because he still mostly played top 6 last year, but he's getting way up there in age now, and it's only a 1-year deal with a lower cap hit. Maybe he shifts into more of a depth role, and like I said, maybe Zetterlund gets more of that ice time. Maybe that's going to be more of the look for the top 6 there. So those are 2 really important things for this team's forward core, just to see how it'll be set up going into October and preseason in September. And then the other huge thing was that Nick Jensen had off-season surgery, and they weren't sure if he was going to be ready for training camp. So Steve Staios goes out and he gets Jordan Spence from the LA Kings, which I think was a fantastic pickup for just a 3rd-round pick and a 6th-round pick. That's a steal for this guy's analytics, his performance in pretty limited ice time, but still like average third pair like time on ice, he had really good results for the LA Kings. So the fact that you can get a player like that for super cheap in terms of the trade value, especially since that third round pick, the Sens gained just by moving down 2 spots in the first round. So they basically made something out of nothing there, turned it into a player who Spence can be assurance for the start of the season if Jensen is still injured, or when Jensen comes back if he's kind of lost a step after the surgery and the long recovery period. Spence could maybe step into the top 4. More likely, though, probably plays most of the season on the third pair with Clevin after Jensen is back and healthy. So having all of that set up and good to go, we have our 7 NHLD. We have pretty much all our top 9 forwards. I think it's just about filling the depth. So we're going to talk a bit about what to expect on July 1st, but I think the fact that all of those problems are already solved is fantastic work by Steve Staios.
Before we talk about the first, I think we need to talk about the draft, because there's kind of 2 opinions about how the Sens drafted this year. A lot of people really like Logan Hensler, who you said managed to drop down 2 spots and still get what some people are calling the best right-handed shot offensively out of the draft. But then I think from there, it was kind of a bit of a reach central is what a lot of people are saying. Like, Blake Vanek, obviously, son of Thomas Vanek, has links to the city, but is there more than that? I'll let you answer.
So the thing with the Sens draft class is that I think a lot of people from the outside will look at it and say, oh, this is bad because they reach for these players, or oh, this is bad because these players are more risky picks. Whereas the criticism within the Sens fan base for the entire past, 6-7 years of Pierre Dorion being the GM and all the I don't know how much scout turnover they had after he was replaced, but we probably still have a lot of the same amateur scouts. The main criticism within the fan base was that they were picking too many safe players who are just huge guys who are physical, and you're just hoping that they can become a 4th liner or a 3rd pairing D for you. And we weren't really drafting any boom or bust offensive potential prospects. So this year it's different, and I think that's why a lot of Sens fans, regardless of what people outside of the fan base think about the Sens draft, I think that's why Sens fans are mostly excited about the picks. Is it's players that they would not have been picking previously. Especially they drafted 2 Russian players. They hadn't drafted a Russian since 2006.
Oh wow!
So that alone in itself is, and that may have been a Eugene Melnyk thing, but that in itself is already wow, things are different. And just a couple of the later round picks who were forwards, like you mentioned, Blake Vanek. I think that people call that a reach. They say that they took him too early, and they always say oh, I don't know why they traded up to get him. Well, I know why they traded up to get him. It's because they had intel that another team was interested in him, right? So I feel like when people criticize that sort of thing, it's oh, you shouldn't have traded up. It's, well, they obviously had a reason for it, right? And Blake Vanek was ranked lower than he went, but I think he's a really interesting prospect. He's got a hard shot, and he's a big body, and son of a former NHLer who was a first line player in his heyday. I feel like that's a pretty good bet to make.
Was a top 3 forward when you could clutch and grab, because
in that era,
the main talking about Blake is he struggles skating, so that is something that can be coached up though. And also I think a lot of people are kind of not really looking at that Lucas Beckman pick, because it was a 3rd round goaltender, but hey,
that guy's got great stats.
They're not quite as good as Dustin Wolf's were in the minors, but I understand.
Still really good though for a 3rd round pick.
Oh yeah, I understand. It seemed that was more, we're just going to take the best player available, which certainly seems to match how NHL teams are drafting. But now that we've looked at the draft, talked about the off season, let's talk a little bit about free agency, because as you said, there's not a ton of work to do. Just going to be kind of painting around the fringes, as they say.
Yeah, so the way I look at the Sens' current cap space, I've got a breakdown on my phone here. On Puckpedia, they are shown as having about 8.2 million in cap space, and you look at that and you say oh, well, they can sign a great player for 7 million or whatever, but this projection is not including a backup goalie, which should be Levi Merilainen. Probably sign him for somewhere between 900K to a million. And then it's also missing multiple forwards for the fourth line and the depth. So if you include a backup goalie, two more forwards, and say that's like roughly 900K to a million for each of those players, then you're down to about 5.3 million cap space with one more forward spot where you could sign someone. So this is the thing where I think we could see them go for sort of like a mid-level free agent who's sort of like a second line, third line tweener. Like I wouldn't be opposed to an addition like that. It would have to be in the $3 to $4 million range. But just when I look at the list of available free agent forwards, I'm like, everyone who I'm interested in that kind of a role would cost way more money than that. Like someone like Pia Suter, he's going to get way overpaid being a center who scored 25 goals.
And being one of the few centers on the market, like, period.
Exactly. So he's probably going to get like 5 million plus, which is already out of our price range. And then, of course, anyone above him in terms of point scoring is like bona fide top six forward who will get way more than that. But that's the first kind of guy in this list that I have sorted by point scoring where I'm like, oh, he could be like second, third line tweener for us, but still he would be too expensive. And then sorting by points, you've got Evgeny Dadonov. I don't think he's coming back for various reasons. Jack Roslovic, that's a guy who could be interesting, but he had a career year of 22 goals. He's not like typically repeating that production from year to year. So maybe a guy like that you could throw in your bottom six and maybe second power play unit. I could see something like that. But then you got guys who have a bunch of holes in their game, like Kuzmenko. I don't see that being a fit. James Van Riemsdyk, maybe, but he's so old and so slow. We already have Giroux as our really old guy. And then it's just like fourth liners, right? Like Corey Perry, Connor Brown. I would like to see Connor Brown maybe come back to Ottawa on like a cheap fourth liner contract.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be opposed to that. But yeah, then you just go farther down the list and it's just fourth liners. So like I would be surprised if they did make an addition in that sort of like $4 million range with that remaining cap space. I think it'll mostly be filling out just the depth. There was a rumor from Bruce Garrioch that they'd be interested in Tanner Jeannot for the fourth line. He might be a little bit more of an expensive fourth liner just because he's huge, throws a lot of hits and fights, so there might be a bit of a bidding war for him. So I do think that could be a signing that we see. Maybe they pay him like north of 2 million and then fill out the rest of the depth with cheaper guys who are sort of like AHL, NHL tweeners. But yeah, a lot of fans want to see the Sens make a huge swing to improve the forward core, like get a big goal scorer like Brock Besser or something. But I just don't see that fitting in the team's cap structure right now. If you were to get a guy like that, I think you got to move off of Drake Batherson in a trade or something, or maybe dump David Perron's salary. But I don't think they're going to do that because he had a really tough year with injuries and personal issues with his family, which I think are all sorted now. But just because the team had to stick by him during all that, I think they're going to want to stick by him for the last year of the contract too. I don't think they're just going to dump his contract and kick him to the curb. I think they're going to want to treat that player right and let him finish that contract here. So
that makes sense.
I just think if the Sens are going to make any big moves, they're probably going to do it by trade if possible.
My one question is, you said you want to go young with your goaltending. Do you think that the leadership team could say, Alex Lyon is standing there as a solid backup candidate? Do you think that could be where some resources get allocated to someone along that like?
I like that option. I think Alex Lyon has been a really good like number 2, number 3 sort of goalie. He's always been in these like tandems or in Detroit they had just were rotating 3 goalies straight up, and he would still put up pretty good numbers despite not playing consistently. If that's a guy that you could get for relatively cheap, maybe start Merilainen and Belleville, or maybe even just to do a 3 goalie rotation like Detroit did. I'm not opposed to that. A guy like Alex Lyon would be great. If not him or someone similar in that vein who played in the NHL last year, maybe like an AHL veteran goalie who has played some NHL games before. And then you could start Merilainen as the backup and have that veteran down in the AHL that you could call up. Dan Vladar, look at that. Here's a question for you. Do you think Dan Vladar is going to get paid in free agency, or do you think he's going to be more of a cheaper contract? Because I'm not really sure where to value him.
That's actually a really interesting question. I think he's more looking for a situation where he can be an actual tandem goaltender rather than looking for top dollar in this round of free agency. Because I think with his numbers last year in relatively limited duty, he was good. So if he can get on somewhere, I think Ottawa would be a good landing spot. I think San Jose could be a good landing spot, but where he gets to actually play occasionally rather than being Dustin Wolf's understudy.
Yeah, because it's time for Dustin Wolf to just take over. So.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, when I think about a guy like Vladar, I'm like, he could work as a backup for the Sens, but I wonder if just because like the amount of games he played last year and he did pretty well, he might get a little bit of a bigger contract. Like if it's anything above 2 million for a backup goalie, it doesn't sound like a lot, but if it's anything more than that, I don't think it makes sense for the Sens because they're already letting Anton Forsberg go, who was making 2.5 million. You want to go cheaper in that role to allocate the money elsewhere, as they've been doing with already like signing Zetterlund, bringing in Spence. So I think just having Marilainen as a cheap backup goalie is a great idea, just to save money and then, get some other veteran in there that you can sign for cheap. I think Dan Vladar might be a little too expensive, maybe.
I think that's a good point to call it, though. Thank you so much, Maude, for sitting down, and best of luck. I'm sure we'll talk again before the season starts.
Sounds good. Thanks, Conrad.
Bye. And now we come to Calgary, Alberta, home of the Calgary Flames. And Anand Unnitahn is going to join me. And the Flames got as close as you can get to making the playoffs without actually getting there.
Yeah, total of 96 points. It was unlucky, I would say. Maybe 21 seconds unlucky even. Just as Minnesota Wild beat the Anaheim Ducks, like very close, 21 seconds. Maybe the Flames, you could have said they could have taken care of a couple early games, like the one against Anaheim Ducks that they blew, or maybe the one against Edmonton in Edmonton. Maybe a couple of the factors you can pull through. But yeah, truly unlucky on the way they had the season as well. Couple injuries early to start the season, so that all put them back behind without making the playoffs.
Yeah, a few too many knee injuries. Obviously, Anthony Mantha, Connor Zary, Justin Kirkland all going through knee injuries. But even with all that being said, the Flames nearly had a Calder winner in Dustin Wolf, and by some people should have been the Calder winner. But what more can we say about this guy? Like, for a guy that was selected in the late rounds because of worries about his size, I think you need to stop worrying about short goaltenders for the rest of the time after seeing Dustin Wolf's rookie performance.
Yeah, 100%. Don't underestimate anybody's powers or capabilities at this point in NHL. The games are changing. The games are evolving. Everything is changing. The new trend, even you're looking at height, shortness, it doesn't matter. You have different types of players performing, and there is no need to too much worry about what the size is or even what the players can produce. They can surprise you out of a blow, and that was Dustin Wolf throughout this season.
And then, obviously, we had a lot of excitement for Flames fans seeing what Zane Parekh was doing in the OHL. And you finally get to have him come up, play in that final game. I wonder if Zane Parekh is kind of the way that the Flames go in this next little part of their retool. A lot of skill, a lot of hockey IQ, and availability to move. What do you think? Do you think Parekh could maybe shock some people and play more than those 10 games of that contract?
Yeah, I don't think there is an avenue for him to go back to the OHL. I think it's just the NHL now for him, to be honest, because he has far surprised everybody in the OHL now. Played really well in the final game, like you said, Conrad, against the LA Kings. So yeah, I think Kevin Ball and maybe Zane Parekh is the one pairing that I would pin down and see possibility see. I don't know if it will right away happen in the opening night roster, but maybe 5 to 10 games down the stretch, maybe you could see a consistent pairing of Ball and Parekh joined together.
Yeah, and the other question is also back on D, and that's the future of Rasmus Andersson. Like, his name has been floated in trade talks all summer long. There was a few rumors that he might get moved before the draft, and now with free agency knocking on the door, you have to wonder, how long is Rasmus going to be a Calgary Flame?
I just saw a news post this morning. I believe Darren Dreger was talking about it. He had mentioned that Rasmus Anderson declined his request to. Apparently, Ken Holland, LA Kings GM, offered a huge, massive deal, but he has declined on that offer. He doesn't want to play in LA, so we'll see if that changes anything around. Now that the draft is done and free agency is knocking, I believe there will be slower interest for trade wise. So we'll have to see how this goes.
Yeah, because a couple of the teams that were rumored to be interested have kind of made their moves. Especially if the Vegas Golden Knights, that trade finally completes and they do acquire Mitch Marner, or if they just wait till free agency and get the tampering investigation. But I digress. It'll be interesting to see if Rasmus's trade value continues to go up and get a bigger haul than even you were being offered now at the trade deadline. But let's now move to the draft. Obviously, the Flames started off, lose their first draft pick of the night to the Montreal Canadiens, which then gets traded for Noah Dobson. That one hurt a little bit. But then the Flames, using the 18th overall selection that they got from New Jersey, select Cole Reshny out of the Victoria Royals. Shorter center, but seems to project to be somebody who's going to be really well liked as a top 6 center. And hey, even if he isn't a center in the NHL, he's got the high-end skill that the Flames certainly are lacking.
Yeah, 100%. I was also looking at deeper into Cole Reshny as well. I did find out that he played in the Circle K Classic during the 2022-2023 year. Some a little insight into local as well. Maybe just play the 4 games overall, but he might see the local city as well. So probably he'll turn into.
And his brother played out for the Okotoks Oilers, so he knows the area. So he's. We all know that he's out of Macklin, Saskatchewan. The popular thing is, oh, he's an Oilers fan. Why did we draft this player? But like, his family has been in and around the area for years with the Okotoks Oilers. Now his brother is attending State and playing hockey up there. So the Reshny family knows the area, and I have no concerns about Cole coming and being able to fit into this lifestyle.
100%.
And then with the final selection attained from the Florida Panthers, the final moving piece in the Matthew Tkachuk trade, Cullen Potter, a left wing out of Arizona State University, one of the youngest players to be selected, one of the youngest players to play in the NCAA last year, left the U.S. National Development Program, decided, I'm going to go play NCAA against men that are sometimes 28 years old. So, 28 is an exaggeration. I think 25 is the oldest, with all the COVID extensions. Yeah. But I digress. It's interesting to see that he's billed as a left winger, but also somebody, when he was in that U.S. National Development Program, was a center. So we'll have to see where he ends up. And then another center, defenseman, center, Aiden Lane, a right winger who's played center. Like, it kind of seemed that Craig Conroy and co., while looking for the best available, they did kind of check that boxes. Has this player been a center in their career?
Yeah, and that is one of the main need that the Flames organization is looking for. Because we always talk about it. We talked it during our regular season games as well. Our face-off dot percentages, that's been low. We can move puck fast through and enter the offensive zone to score a goal. Scoring has been low. So can one of these projected centers who at least have tried center roles can be a good lifeline for us a couple years down the road?
For sure. And it is really going to be a test of this Flames organizational depth as they continue to develop. And obviously, the Flames, since the passing of Chris Snow, have really changed how they're evaluating using the structures that he set up. But it really is going to be, how do we continue to build off his legacy here in Calgary? But now let's look at free agency. That is the next phase, starting tomorrow at noon. Well, that'll let you know when we're recording this, folks. But what do you think the Flames' number one need is, and why is it center depth?
Center depth, once again, like I explained just moments ago, we need to win those face-offs.
Yeah.
We need some scoring, and we need to be able to enter those offensive rushes as soon as possible, as soon as we get the puck. Minimal turnovers, minimal blockages, and just fast entry. And I think that's what the Flames need to look for. Especially, we can probably pinpoint that Kevin Rooney, our fourth line center, will test free agency market. So we need somebody probably to replace fourth line, unless it's going to be, they might send Backlund down to the fourth line. We have talked about
Justin
a couple of
Kirkland
minutes.
potentially as well, filling that role
Yeah,
on
now
a
that
full-time
he's coming.
basis.
Yeah, now that he's coming back. But I think one curious from the other teams that I would look for is Aaron Ekblad. I think from the Florida Panthers. I think he has been linked to many of the times for the Calgary Flames, so we'll see if that's one choice.
Well, and if you look at some of the projected salary AAV, an $8 million Aaron Ekblad is not the worst place to be if you are going to need to replace Rasmus Andersson. I think the pressure would have been more to go in on Ekblad if Rasmus was traded already, but the fact that Rasmus is still on this lineup gives me a little bit of a hesitation in saying that. The other thing is the Flames need to stay young. We don't really want to be looking in at necessarily some of these older centers that are on the free agent market. But I could see a guy like Christian Dvorak filling that fourth line, third line center role, just to give you a couple names. And you do have to remember, the Flames are losing their backup goalie. Dan Vladar will also be heading to free agency. So that's an avenue you will need to look at. Whether that's someone like Alex Lyon, who is older than I expected, or whether that's going to be filling from within, allowing Logan Cooley to finally make his return to the NHL.
Devin Cooley.
Or Devin. I always mix those two up. Devin Cooley, not Logan Cooley. It's a me thing. But yeah, whether that's the way the Flames elect to go, or whether they elect to sign somebody like a Jake Allen, who is predicted to be a key piece for some team. But thank you, Anand, for joining me, and we will surely talk again before the season begins for the Calgary Flames.
100%. Take care. Thanks for watching.
Hello and welcome, everybody, to the off-season check-ins. We'll head to the northern part, the northernmost city in Canada, talking to Avry, obviously, of the Edmonton Oilers crew. Avry, the Oilers get as close as you can get to winning the Stanley Cup without actually doing it for the second straight year. Now there's a little bit of hindsight on it. What can you say about the season that was for the Edmonton Oilers?
You know, it was a weird one in a sense in which mid-season you didn't know what this team that was. You didn't really know where they were going to go. They still finished in third in the division. They get big series wins over Dallas, Vegas, LA, make it to a cup final. But once again, this is a team that just couldn't find a way to get over the hump on Florida. We saw in Game 6 of the final a team that ran out of gas and couldn't handle Florida's forecheck once again. So even though you got back to a cup final two years in a row, there's still an element of this team is missing maybe one or two more things, which is tough because we thought going to be the revenge year, and it didn't happen this year, Conrad.
Well, it got as close as you could to it without actually getting that revenge, as stated. But I kind of called in our playoff prediction that this was the series of the rat. And the Oilers' rats didn't come to play. Like, Evander Kane was effectively a non-factor, and obviously now he's no longer an Oiler. But Corey Perry might have been one of the biggest names for the Oilers. And now he's an unrestricted free agent, of course, up there in age, so not exactly shocking. But is there an element of the Oilers are kind of doing some addition by subtraction, potentially?
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like Victor Arvidsson's going to be dealt. They traded away Evander Kane, and I know Corey Perry wants a 2-year deal, but I don't know if they're going to give a 2-year deal to a guy who's 40 years old. That's a risky play in my mind. So I do see him leaving. So my thing is that, yes, guys like Kane, Perry are gone. I think this team's going to try and get a little bit younger. I know Brock Besser's a name out there that could be coming in possibly. So I do think The goal is right now, get a little bit younger, get a little bit healthier, and try to retool that way as opposed to bring back the older vets in my mind, Conrad.
Yeah, and a little bit of a change, not necessarily with the lineup, but behind the bench. With Glenn Gulletson getting the head coaching job in Dallas, it does allow Knobloch to kind of readjust his coaching staff once again. Have you heard any names that have been kind of floating around in Edmonton, or is it so new that that hasn't even started happening yet?
Yeah, it's so new. There's been no names formally linked yet, though. But I know there's a couple of names I would like to see. I know Manny Malhotra is someone who I would love to see in Edmonton, led Abbotsford to the Calder Cup championship this year. He's someone who's done a really great job as an assistant coach in Vancouver, that guy in Abbotsford, and someone else too. I think deserves a chance again is Joel Ward, someone who's done a lot of work in Henderson and with the Golden Knights. Those are two guys who I'd love to see getting a chance in Edmonton with some top tier talent here in Alberta.
And I didn't necessarily want to bring this up, but the number one concern of the fan base that I heard down in Calgary, because we do hear a lot of Oilers news down here still, is concerns with the goaltending.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the big name target that's been linked to the Oilers for a few years, now off the market, as John Gibson has been traded. Where do the Oilers go in terms of goaltending? Do you think they try and make a splash with one of the guys who's a free agent, or do you think that that change still needs to come to be via a trade? Because the biggest name available in free agency is probably Jake Allen, and I don't think that's that much of an improvement.
I do think this team does make. I know this team right now has been pretty quiet. They haven't been showing their cards in terms of goaltending. I know they do like Stuart Skinner. He's going to be here next year. He's on a team-friendly deal, homegrown player. That's a guy who is going to be back in net next year. But I do think a name out there is Alex Lyon. He's someone who I think to get out of Detroit. I mean, that team has what 55 goaltenders under contract, and now you're bringing Gibson to be another goaltender. I think Alex Lyon is someone who his team brings in, and you try to roll a 1A 1B tandem going into next fall.
It's funny you say that because that was kind of a name that Maude was looking at for Ottawa potentially. Especially because if you look at the contracts that both those players have signed, Alex Lyon's cap hit probably fits around more where Edmonton would be hoping for rather than somebody, as I mentioned, like a Jake Allen or even potentially, who else was it that I was thinking of? Anton Forsberg, because I think both those guys will be asking for 3+, and Lyon probably is around that 2 million figure based on his body of work. But enough talking about the offseason, and we'll look to what just happened last week with the draft. Obviously, the Oilers did not have a pick in the first two rounds, and then they select Tommy Lafreniere, which some people feel was a bit of a reach, even in the third round with that 83rd pick. What are your thoughts on Lafreniere and the rest of the Oilers selection from the draft?
A lot of these guys, I mean, they'll get camp invites, they'll be in dev camp, but these are guys who are not going to be in the big club, maybe not until 2027, 2028. These are guys who you're drafting for long-term development. If you see any one of these guys playing next year or the year afterwards, his team might be in some trouble. So, like, that was a draft in which this front office has said, you know what, we're drafting for the next 3 to 5 years, not the next 2 to 3 in my mind.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The most interesting selection to me was David Lewandowski, a player that had played at the top level in Germany, but decides, you know what, I'm going to come over, finish the year out in Saskatoon with the Blades, and did all right. So it's kind of interesting to see that selection coming the Oilers' way. And let's be honest, kind of probably have the biggest German influence on your team. So that seemed like a wise pick to me. But then with us talking about the addition by subtraction and the Oilers not necessarily having the most cap space and needing to reserve some cap space for next year, how do you address the holes in the lineup in free agency if you were in the front office instead of talking about the Oilers, Avry?
It's not easy. I mean, you're able to, yes, get rid of Kane and not retain salary. That's a really big one now. So I would like to see this team do what they can to make space for a Besser, because I think that's the kind of guy you want to bring into your top 9, who will be a very effective piece, who can still find a way to score, get points, But again, it's going to be tough. I know this team is also in talks of possibly dealing away Adam Henrique, someone who, when they brought him in a couple of years ago, I thought, oh, that's a nice signing. But in the postseason, again, Adam Henrique vanished. He wasn't there. The middle six just got caved in by Florida too often, too many times. So I do think this team will go out and try to move Arvidsson, try to move Henrique, and then see what they can try and acquire going forward. I know before deadline this team was linked to a Brad Marchand, but I don't know if you can make that work. I don't think he'll come in. I know it's more likely he'll be going to say probably Toronto than Edmonton. So I do think this team tries to go on. Their big fish play is a Brock Besser this summer here.
So you do need to obviously make some move for that. And there are some people who have said, is Stuart Skinner the piece you need to move to start making headway? But you don't seem to think that's the case. The other big name that I think a lot of people are thinking about with free agency and potentially trades is Evan Bouchard. There were, I'm not going to say credible rumors, but there was noise around his name at the trade deadline this year. After his playoff performance, I don't think he's going anywhere, but I think it's worthwhile to talk about what his value is. And because is this the last year of his deal, or is he?
Last year. Yeah, so he's someone where I do think he'll get paid. He's going to be that guy who will get over $9 million easily. And I know people have talked about, oh, you got to trade him, you got to deal him. But why? Because he's 25 years old, and there's not that many right-shot D-men who are that good and who are that able to change a game. Because, yes, there are moments in the postseason where Bouchard's play at times did take a hit. But when you watch his full complete game, you see he's great at zone denials. He's great with an active stick. When people want to say he's one-dimensional, I always say to people, you don't watch a game enough to see how Evan Bouchard plays. You cherry-pick moments here and there where he makes a mistake to say he's a bad defenseman. But when you watch the overall game, he is an elite D-man in this league. So yeah, he's going to get over $9 million. That's a really big thing for this team to try to avoid an offer sheet, which I'm sure someone said, you know what, hey, we should offer sheet Bouchard. It's imperative for this front office to not let that happen, because this is a guy whose game is going to continue to develop. And I've said before in different shows, Conrad, only Bobby Orr has more playoff points per game all time than him. Only Bobby Orr has more than Evan Bouchard all time. That's absurd.
Yeah, it seems that both both Alberta teams have Bobby Orr comparables. Obviously, you're saying playoff points. And then the Flames, we have Zane Parekh, who is the only defenseman to surpass his points totals in the OHL. So kind of an interesting fact. And the reason I bring up Bouchard is because I really think of him as similar to when Dion Phaneuf was a Calgary Flame. People call Dion's game maybe a little bit more two-dimensional, the big hits and the big shot. But he had a very long NHL career, and obviously not all of it here in Calgary, but that's a very serviceable guy, and there is still lots of time for Evan Bouchard's game to still keep building. Is there one name out there that's kind of scratches an itch in your brain? Is this someone that the Oilers could bring in? Because I have one that I think could potentially go and would be on his revenge tour, but I don't know if the salary cap is going to allow for it. Andrew Mangiapane. I think that's an interesting name for this Oilers squad.
Yeah, I've heard that name as well, too. I've heard that name as someone to watch out for, and I think he would be a solid fit in this market as someone. We see him score before. We see him have the ability to be a very effective forward, and you put him in Edmonton's top 9. He's someone who could absolutely chip in on their top 6. That's a name who I think could give you a solid 20-goal campaign. I should be on the radar. Absolutely, Conrad.
But, Avery, thank you so much for making time in your overly busy schedule. Avery, the man who doesn't know how to say no. But we'll have to see how it goes, and I'm sure we'll talk again before regular season starts. Avery, enjoy your quote-unquote off-season as much as you ever have one. We'll see you around, Dave.
I'll try, Conrad. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the final stop of our cross-country Game Over tour, talking about the season that was, free agency. You got the gist. Vancouver's the last one. But, hey, I'm joined by Zach Clarke. Zach, Let's talk Canucks.
The Canucks season, arguably the worst in the league comparative to expectations. I mean, coming into the year, you look at the analytics, for example, from Money Puck, had them at 4th best odds in the league to win the Stanley Cup. So to go from those kind of odds to then not even making the playoffs is a pretty brutal gut punch for Vancouver.
Especially when Vancouver lost to, or was lower in the standings than the Calgary Flames, who were predicted to be a bottom feeder in the league. Just a little salt in the wound. But
yeah, a little bit.
It's been an interesting offseason with a lot of talk about what this Vancouver Canucks team needs to be successful. There's been talks about a trade that went down in the offseason that some people are saying helped out a in division, let alone in conference opponent. Let's get into that right now. Evander Kane, the newest member, well, he has a contract the rest of the guys don't that they just drafted, but newest member of the Vancouver Canucks, and after he gets jumped today.
Yeah, that was a pretty surprising piece of news coming out this morning. Obviously, wishing the best for him. From the reports that we've sounds like it wasn't at all his fault. So yeah, definitely wishing the best for his recovery. Tough way to start his Vancouver career. But yeah, it was certainly a trade it was one of those trades that when I first saw it on social media, I thought it was a hoax. You know, people love to post fake trades on Twitter to get reactions. That's exactly what I thought it was, because it just seemed to not make a lot of sense for Vancouver. Although now that we've had a couple days to sit on it, I think that I'm probably higher on it than some of my other colleagues, especially here at Game Over. It's risky. There's no questioning it. But if you look at the upside, there is certainly some there. Over his last 82 regular season games, he has 31 goals. Now, I did say over his last 82 games because, as you well know, he barely played at all last year. In fact, he only played in the playoffs, 0 regular season games played. So he is an injury-plagued player. But at his best, he is theoretically what the Canucks need. A power forward that's not afraid to get really physical and can score goals. The Canucks, especially as it sounds like going to lose Brock Besser, need to find a way to replace some goals up and down the lineup, and Evander Kane could certainly do that. Now, of course, this is not without risk. The reason that people have been so hard on this deal so far is that you have bailed out a divisional rival. I mean, this was a hole in the ship that is the Edmonton Oilers, and you've just given them a bucket to start bailing out, taking on the full $5 million cap hit of Evander Kane. And not only that, but having to give up a 4th to get him definitely felt like a bit more of a price than, I was expecting Edmonton to have to give him away, / maybe even attach something to do it. And then, of course, you get into the whole possible off-ice thing. I'll say that people who are concerned about locker room issues, possibly given the seemingly fragile nature of Elias Pettersson, but his locker room issues, I mean, that was from one of his first years in the league. We haven't heard anything like that in about a decade's time. Now, off-ice, obviously we've heard a lot of stuff, and a lot more recently than that. But when it comes to the locker room specifically, I am at least hopeful it won't damage the Canucks too much. But, I mean, this is them swinging for the fences. And I'll tell you right now, it's either going to be a home run or they're going to be out.
Yeah, let's just not put his tracksuit anywhere near some showers. But anyways, you mentioned that likely going to lose Brock Besser, and that's not the only name that I can remember. I'm just looking here. Center, you're also losing
Hughes Suter most likely as well.
Yeah. It's going to be a tough addition.
He's going to be a big loss for Vancouver. Obviously, Brock Besser is he's exactly what everyone thinks he is. 40 goal scorer, great in the playoffs. The heart of Vancouver, longest tenured player on the Canucks right now. I mean, I don't need to tell Vancouver fans, and indeed hockey fans, what kind of a player Brock Besser is. So I'm going to spend more of time talking about Hughes Suter because I think that's an underratedly huge loss. There is very, very few players in this league that can play both winger and center well. Not just filling in as a stopgap, but play it well. On top of that, we saw Hughes Suter being forced into the top 6 for 20 games near the end of the year, and he was point per game in that time. He's so versatile. You can play him on absolutely any line on your team, and he will fit. Having that kind of versatility is something that the coach doesn't have to worry about night in, night out, because you can pencil him wherever and get results. Those kind of players are incredibly rare, and I think the Canucks will really miss Hughes Suter, as it does sound like both Suter and Brock Besser are likely going to be going to free agency Nothing, of course, 100% confirmed till July 1st, but that's what it sounds like as of now.
Yeah, so that takes us to the 2025 NHL draft, where the Canucks' first pick out of the nearby Seattle Thunderbirds, Braden Coots, another center, kind of projects to be, if everything goes perfectly correct, that 2C that can maybe play as a 1C in certain scenarios.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say that I think that you're right. That's exactly what he is. I don't want people to be setting their hopes kind of too high, but I also think that what I really like about this Canucks pick is that he seems to have one of the highest floors of a prospect. So he might not have the ceiling of an elite first-line center, but I would be absolutely gobsmacked if he at least doesn't turn into some sort of an NHL player for Vancouver. On top of that, the leadership characteristics, was named a captain in the WHL at an incredibly young age. In fact, is still, after already having to see for a year, one of the youngest captains in the WHL. So to have that kind of leadership ability from such a young age, on top of that, close to point per game, right shot center. This was a draft where the Canucks really did try to fill that positional need. They need centers. They need as many as they can get. Well, they drafted 5, so you got to hope at least one will end up becoming an NHL caliber player.
But then you do see in the second round a little bit of a reach by most draft boards. Alexei Medvedev, the London Knights goaltender, a lot of people had him ranked outside the top 100, let alone within the top 50 where he was drafted. And considering the situation for the Canucks, that a lot of people looking on the outside of the market, looking into Vancouver, are saying, you've already got a goaltending logjam at the top. Why you're adding another goaltender into that system? It seems like that was maybe just them taking the highest guy on their draft board, regardless of how everyone else felt about the pick.
Well, so interestingly enough about Alexei Medvedev, because you're right, a lot of the public boards, i.e. from the scouts, from the figures in the media that we saw, you're right, had Alexei Medvedev ranked a lot lower. However, since the draft, we've actually heard that a lot of internal boards for NHL teams had him ranked a lot higher than the public data might suggest. A lot of teams were quite high on Alexei Medvedev. And I think for good reason. 6'2" mobile goaltender. He has the tools to become an NHL regular. Now, you make a good point about the Canucks logjam in goaltending, but I actually think that logjam is exactly why they needed to add another quality prospect goaltender in this draft. And the reason that I say that is the Canucks are in a position right now where they pretty much have to trade one of those goaltenders. Artur Shilov's being the most likely one to be departing, in my humble opinion. He now is no longer able to be sent up from the NHL to AHL without waiver claim. He has to go through that process. There's a 100% chance he would get claimed if he goes through the waiver claim. 100%, no doubt in my mind. So because of that, you then either need to have him as your regular NHL backup, or you need to bury him in the AHL. And neither of those seem like a tantalizing prospect for the Vancouver Canucks, who already have 2 NHL-caliber goaltenders in Kevin Lankinen and Thatcher Demko. And from the reports that we've heard, Lankinen already locked up long-term. Demko, it sounds like they're trying to pursue that extension as well. So putting the pieces together, it does seem like Shilovs is likely to be traded. And then you do want to have some more prospects that have legitimate chances at the NHL level. I still like some of the guys in Abbotsford. Nikita Tolopilo has some upside. Ty Young has probably a little bit more upside, but also a little bit more growing to do. Mm-hmm. And then whichever one of those can make it to the NHL level, you replace that spot with Alexei Medvedev, who I am quite high on. I think he really could become something at the NHL level. So I think that it's a pick that, while it raised some eyebrows, it does make sense.
So I'm just double checking. You mean Calgary Canucks legend Ty Young in the system?
Of course.
I love Younger. Anyways, but let's look to free agency, because the Canucks are going to have to be active. Well, they don't have to worry about goaltending. In fact, as we mentioned, going to have to likely ship off one of the 3 NHL caliber guys. There are going to be some holes that are going to need to be filled. I don't think it's going to be a single guy that replaces Brock Besser. I don't think it's going to be a single guy that replaces Pius Suter. And it's especially going to be harder to replace Suter because it is such a narrow center market this year. There's not a lot of top-tier options.
No, there really isn't. And that's the thing, is the Canucks are in a bit of a dilemma here. They don't have the most cap space in the world. And realistically, if we're talking about trying to compete for an actual Stanley Cup championship as opposed to just squeaking into the playoffs, they're going to need to add 2 top 6 forwards. Not 1, but 2. And the most important will definitely be that second-line center. There's no question that's exactly what the Canucks are after. And right now, the options are thin. I mean, if you have a look, right, it looks like Mikael Granlund's probably the best option. And I like him, but if he's your 2C, you know, do you feel good about competing for a Stanley Cup with Mikael Granlund as your second-line center? Probably not. But it's a really thin market, which makes me think that the Canucks are more likely to pursue a trade option. Now, from the rumors we've heard, it sounds like right now the Canucks are really trying to go after Bowen Byram out of Buffalo, which makes absolutely zero sense to me. It's one of those things that reminds you that, you know what, your view as a media is definitely different than the views that front offices have. Because to me, I just can't see the fit for Bowen Byram here. You'd have to ship out one of your top defensive prospects or players. Now, that is the one advantage that the Canucks do have right now, is that I would argue that their defensive core up and down is a top 5 in the league. At the very least, top 10, closing in on top 5. It's incredibly deep. You could afford to have a few guys injured and still be fielding a very competent NHL defensive core. So because of that, you do have some trade pieces to work with. You could afford to lose top prospect Tom Willander or someone like defenseman Elias Pettersson, although I'd hate to lose him, or Victor Mancini. Or even Kirill Kudryavtsev. Some other guys in Abbotsford have some value right now, especially after winning the Calder Cup. So not all hope is lost. I think that they're more likely to be able to solve these issues through trades than free agency, however, given that it's a very poor free agent class.
Yeah, but we have, as much as Calgary and Vancouver are rivals on the ice, we kind of have a similar system where we need to worry about, okay, this is all well and good, but what do the Aquilinis and what does the ownership of the Calgary Flames Sports and Entertainment Group think? Does that cause any stress for you? Because there's a lot of people online, not necessarily with media credentials, but we're saying, was this Aquilini bringing in Kane? Is this him trying to assert more of a thumbprint on the squad from the ownership box?
Well, there's no question that Aquilini and Kane, he I don't know whether you get an official hand, but he's well liked. Aquilini does very much like Evander Kane as a player, and by the sounds of it, as a person as well. I think he's always had a hand in the team. Anyone who's a Canucks fan knows that Aquilini does have his thumbprint on the team. To what extent, we'll never know. We never will. But it is quite possibly a chance. However, it does at least make enough sense that I don't hate the move. Right now, the Canucks' interests are aligned with Aquilini. For a long time, rebuilding for this team was really difficult because Aquilini, as an owner, is someone that always really just wants to make the playoffs. I don't think that he's necessarily too worried about having that long-term playoff success, more so just make it to the playoffs.
Let's go get that 2 games of playoff revenue, right?
Exactly. But at least for this coming year, that's what the Canucks need to do, is make the playoffs. This is the year of trying to convince Quinn Hughes to stay. And to do that, you're going to have to prove that you're a competitive team. So right now, their interests are at least well aligned with the ownership group. So I'm not too worried about that going forward to this year. I still think the Evander Kane, I don't know, it's a tough move because it is such a risk. But at the very least, again, there is some upside there. And there's a chance it could work out. It would be the funniest thing ever after shipping off a player that is very similar to Evander Kane because he didn't work with Elias Pettersson. If somehow Kane comes in and does, I was saying this to my father when he asked me about the trade. I think there's probably a 90% chance it blows up in the Canucks' faces, but a 10% chance that it could work out really well. And you know what? Those aren't the worst odds the Canucks have ever had of success.
Oh, I'm going to get some flack from this, but I'd rather be gambling on Evander Kane than with Evander Kane. So, Zach Clarke, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for hitting in the 9 hole, I guess, if we're going to use baseball sports analogies. But we'll have to see if the battle for the Canadian Western Conference teams is as interesting as it was at the end of last year.
Well, best of luck to your team. Best of luck to my team, as both of them, who knows what the future holds and whether either one will have a shot at the playoffs next year.
And who knows, maybe we can get Murray Edwards